I don't like telling this story, and most people don't believe it when I do. It brings back too many painful memories. Memories that I've been running away from since I was a 10-year-old boy. I've been called a devil, a murderer, a child just desperate for attention. I'm 40 now, and I'm sure people still question my sanity. I even question my sanity. It's been 30 years, but I'll never forget what happened in that house. I will never forget what I heard, what I saw. I saw things and heard things that no living person should see. Things that will leave you questioning your sanity. I will warn you, this true story, is not for the faint of heart. Man. It was Ohio. It was in Ohio. 1985. When we moved into the house, my mother was looking for a fresh start after my father's abusive acts became too much for her to bear. He never touched me or my sister Hannah in any harmful way, but he and my mother would go at it almost every night. My mother would be left with a black eye and swollen lip. I pretended like I didn't know what was going on. I regret that now. When we first arrived at the house, I could tell that it was really old. The windows were dusty, the paint was weathered and peeling off, and the grass stood almost as tall as I did. It looked abandoned, as if we were the first people to live there in decades. There was also an old swing set in the back, and behind that was a pond that held dirty water in a greenish color. The fence would creak as you opened it, as did the stairs. The first 2 months was silent. Nothing was really out of the ordinary, but I noticed something that seemed strange to me. I was in the house, looking through the window to make sure that Hannah was okay being alone in the backyard. She was on a swing set, but oddly the swing next to her was moving back and forth, as if someone was there with her. But there was no one there, nobody but Hannah. I figured it was probably just the wind. I went out there because I didn't want her out there alone. I was very protective of my sister. When I set her outside, I stayed out there for a minute, and I thought maybe I was imagining things because I saw someone in the hallway window. They looked down right at me. I couldn't really see their face. Maybe it was Hannah. Maybe it wasn't. It wasn't really until the next night when things got frightening. Hannah's screaming echoed through the house in the middle of the night. My mother and I woke up and quickly ran to her. It sounded as if someone was attacking her, but we didn't see anyone. She was just screaming on at the top of her lungs, pointing at the ceiling. "She's trying to drown me!" She screamed more than once. We didn't even see anything, but she saw something that night. Something was there. After that night, things started getting weird. I've heard footsteps echoing through the house, and I know this is going to sound weird, but I've heard something singing. It sounded like a young girl, and I know it wasn't Hannah because it sounded nothing like her. I was laying in my bed when I heard it. It must have been around midnight because everyone else was asleep. She sung it over and over again. The birds are singing, singing, singing. Go to bed, go to bed. I'll see you in the morning, morning, morning. Now rest your head, rest your head. It got louder and louder. It sounded as if somebody was coming toward me. They were getting closer and closer until eventually they were right at my door. I heard water dripping. It sounded strange, but I know what I heard. The singing stopped suddenly, and all I could hear was the water dripping. Then everything became silent. The doorknob started turning just slightly. I hid under my covers, and eventually whoever it was, or whatever it was, had left. That wasn't the only time I had a weird experience like that late at night. I've also heard whispers. Most of the time I heard them coming from the basement. I never understood what the whisperer was saying. But one night I heard them loud and clear. I was asleep. I heard footsteps in my room. It felt like someone was watching me, like someone was sitting right at the edge of my bed. I lay there with my eyes closed, hoping it'd go away. Then it whispered, "Who are you?" I didn't reply. I didn't want to make a habit out of talking to things I couldn't see. It sounded like a woman. I guess it left afterwards because I didn't hear anything else. I was horrified by what was going on in the house. I tried to explain it to my mother, but she never believed me. She claimed I was dreaming, and I almost believed that maybe I was dreaming. My mother seemed distant. She wasn't the same person anymore. I worried about Hannah as well. She must have been traumatized by what she saw that night. I loved my sister. We did a lot together. But she became distant as well. One day, as I walked past her room, I heard her singing. The birds are singing, singing, singing. Go to bed, go to bed. I'll see you in the morning, morning, morning. Now rest your head, now rest your head. I walked in her room and she stopped singing. She was sitting on the floor, drawing as usual. Where did you learn that song from, Hannah? I asked her. I learned it from my friend, she replied, pointing towards the corner in the room. I looked around the room, but I didn't see anyone or anything. I noticed her drawing, and it was really strange. She drew herself sitting on the swing, and next to her, another girl. Who is that girl you drew? I asked her. That's my friend. Her name is Maddie. I figured she had an imaginary friend. She was 6 years old, so that was normal. But that didn't explain the song. Is she the one who taught you that song? She shook her head yes. Her mother used to sing it to her every night, she told me. And she still does sometimes. Well, where is she now? I asked her. She dropped her crayon and stood up from the floor. She's behind you. It was then that I felt a cool breeze rush through my body. I turned around slowly just to see myself through the mirror that hung against the wall. That's when I saw her. She was only there for less than 2 seconds, standing to the right of me, drenched in water. She looked young, around 6, the same age as Hannah. I wasn't as scared as she should have been. I asked Hannah if she was a girl who was on the ceiling that one night. She said no, and that the one who was on the ceiling was Maddie's mother. She said that her mother was evil and that she would kill us if we told anybody about her, the same way she killed Maddie. I wasn't scared until then. I wanted to tell my mother, but she wouldn't have believed me anyway. I just wanted to protect my sisters, so I said no word about it to anyone. I didn't really think that a ghost could do any physical harm. But I was young. I was 10 at the time. I didn't know much about ghosts. The only thing I knew about them was that they were people who were once living. Later that day, I was walking past the basement when I heard the laughter of a young girl. It sounded like Hannah, so I walked down the stairs. She was sitting alone in the middle of the basement. You shouldn't be down here by yourself, Hannah, I said to her. I'm not by myself, she said. She had one of those old jewelry boxes with a ballerina that would twirl and play music when you opened it. What are you doing down here? I asked her. Maddie wanted to show me her jewelry box. I looked around. I didn't see anybody. Not that I wanted to. I felt very uneasy, like somebody was watching me. Somebody was there. We have to go now, I yelled. We have to get upstairs. I just wanted to go. I just didn't want to be down in that basement. Shh, she whispered. You're gonna wake her up. Get up, Hannah, I yelled. I heard a noise. It came from the other room in the basement. Hannah started crying. I could see the fear in her eyes. She stood up on her feet, dropping the jewelry box. Danny? She cried, pointing behind me. She's behind you. My heart popped out of my chest. I remember shaking and my heart beating at a rapid pace as I slowly turned around. I froze in fear for a few seconds. She was there. She had long black hair and was wearing a black gown. Her face was pale and her eyes were pitch black. It was like looking in the eyes of death itself. I grabbed Hannah and we ran upstairs to our mother. I wasn't sure if she'd believe us. She told us to stay out of the basement, and that was it. The face still haunts me to this day. Hours after that frightening experience, I lay awake in my bed as I couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, so everybody else was asleep. I heard music coming from outside my room. I got out of bed, thinking that maybe it was Hannah. I peeked out of my door, but I didn't see anyone. I walked down the hallway and on the floor. In front of Hannah's room was the jewelry box from the basement. I watched as the ballerina twirled around and around and around. Everything was like in slow motion. I became lightheaded. The air was cold and heavy. Somebody was watching me. I heard somebody singing that same song. It wasn't a young girl this time. It was a woman. The singing was coming from Hannah's room. I opened the door, the singing stopped, and I didn't see anyone. Hannah was fast asleep, and I asked her about it the next day, but she had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Weeks after that incident was when everything took a turn for the worst. Just like before, she was screaming at the top of her lungs in the middle of the night. We ran to her, me and my mother. "She's trying to drown me!" she screamed. "She's trying to drown me!" "Who?" my mother asked. "Who are you talking about?" Hannah stopped screaming and stood from her bed. She was shaking. Her face was pale and her voice became weak. Her eyes were wide as she stood there, almost like she was frozen, like she couldn't move. "She's behind you," she whispered suddenly, pointing at the door with a horrifying look in her eyes. Bam! The door slammed shut, and I found myself alone, outside in the hallway. They were screaming. My mother and my sister were screaming, and there was nothing I could do. I tried to open the door, but I was stuck. "Let me in! Let me in!" I yelled. I kicked and I punched because that was all I could do. They were screaming as loud as they could until suddenly the screaming stopped. "Mom? Hannah?" I screamed out. No answer. They were dead. My mother and sister were dead. That's all I could think. "The birds are singing, singing, singing. Go to bed, go to bed. I'll see you in the morning, morning, morning. Now rest your head, now rest your head." It sounded like my mother. I heard the door unlock from the other side. I opened it slowly to find my mother sitting at the side of the bed, singing to Hannah, who was fast asleep. She then stood up. I saw the emptiness in her eyes as she walked by me, as if I wasn't even there. I was beyond confused. It just didn't make any sense. I woke up the next morning to a loud noise coming from the kitchen. I ran downstairs to see my mother making breakfast, soaking wet and singing that damn song. "Why are you all wet, Mother?" I asked. She said nothing. "Where's Hannah?" "Who are you?" she whispered. "It's me, Mother. I'm your son." She looked at me, staring into my eyes as if she was stealing my soul. She smiled, a crooked, evil smile I never saw before. "I don't have a son," she said. "Now run along. Maddie isn't available." She walked down the basement and closed the door. After less than a minute, I heard a loud noise that echoed from the basement. I ran upstairs to Hannah's room, searching everywhere for her. She wasn't in there. I walked out into the hall, and that's when I saw her walk down the stairs. I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought she was dead. I chased after her, and she led me outside, but I lost her as I shuffled through the tall grass. I ran to the backyard thinking she might be playing in the swing set. I didn't see her, but the swings were both swinging rapidly. I heard laughter. It sounded like two young girls. One of them actually sounded like Hannah, but I couldn't see anyone. I walked behind the swing set, and that's when I saw her. She was floating lifeless, face down in the pond. I heard her voice as it echoed with the wind. She was singing. "The birds are singing, singing, singing. Go to bed, go to bed. I'll see you in the morning, morning, morning. Now rest your head, rest your head."